All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our GovRAMP Learning Series, preparing for the Cyber Summit. I don't know about you, but I'm quite excited for that. I'm Jessica Van Eerde, Chief Operations and General Counsel of GovRAMP, and I'm going to be your host here today. So this series is designed to bring us back to the basics, giving both government and providers practical insights ahead of our GovRAMP Cyber Summit in October. Yesterday, we focused in on the private sector. And so today we're going to shift lenses to the public sector, specifically how government agencies can strengthen procurement strategies and evaluate risk when adopting cloud solutions. So here's how today's session is going to flow. First, we're going to start with a keynote conversation, and then we'll move into a panel discussion. Once we're done with that, we will finish up with optional office hours where you can ask GovRAMP leadership and the PMO any questions that you might have. If we can't answer them, we will make sure to get back to you. So to begin this morning, and we do have a very tight schedule, as you could tell, so we're just going to kick it right off. I am really excited to be joined today by Travis Abatemarco, who is the Director of Federal Compliance at Okta. Travis and I are going to talk today about how governments can build shared responsibility directly into their cloud contracts, whether through SLAs, accountability clauses, or clear terms that set the tone for strong partnerships. Together, we're going to share strategies for aligning expectations and reducing risk before issues ever arise. So I'm going to kick it off and pass it over to Travis. Travis, thank you so much for being here. Let's jump right in.
Thanks for having me, Jessica. Great to be here with everybody and looking forward to going into this conversation. So yes, I am ready to jump in. And Jessica, I tend to go into the weeds on these topics sometimes, so don't let me go there if I'm going too deep into the technicalities and the what have yous. But yeah, let's talk about shared responsibility in the cloud. Do we want to move on to the next slide, please? Okay. So when we talk about shared responsibility in the cloud, the mission is obviously to empower the government to securely leverage cloud services. And that sounds relatively straightforward, right? The mission is straightforward, but under the hood of this mission, there's actually a lot of complexities and subjectivity in this whole conversation, as in there's a challenge built in, which is you don't want to overburden the government with redundant responsibilities for things they're already doing in their wider kind of environment and the various cloud services that they're using. You want them focused on exactly what they need to do to securely leverage your service, but you have to balance that kind of tailoring of your responsibilities to ensure that you're also not creating blind spots, because that's the ultimate goal, right? As a security provider, we want to make sure the agencies are laser focused on what they need to do for our service. However, we don't want to get too laser focused and have them assume things, are covered by the cloud service provider and create security blind spots. So a key part of understanding customer responsibilities in the cloud is obviously understanding the different cloud deployment models, right? Infrastructure as a service, platforms as a service, and software as a service. And generally, when you move from the left to right there, you're going to see the customer responsibility for the end user. You're going to see it decrease, but it really decreases in scope, and like the technical scope is what I'm talking about when I say scope, as in the different infrastructure layers or the technology stacks, starting from bare metal all the way up to the end user on the application. As you go from infrastructure as a service to software as a service, the responsibilities generally will decrease, but the catch-22 is controls have to be implemented at all layers of the stack, right? So if we're doing something at the infrastructure layer, we're essentially going to be asking the agencies, the end user, to do the same thing at the application layer. And that goes for essentially all cloud services. So the takeaway from that first part is, again, controls can seem redundant on customer responsibility matrices, but the real takeaway is that, security in depth, defense in depth, if we're doing it at one layer, we're doing it at all layers. And when I say we, I mean Okta, the cloud service providers, everybody working together with the ultimate goal of protecting government resources. So let me talk about resources for a second and what we can use to kind of come to this understanding between you and your cloud service provider and the agencies and the government. So the flagship foundational document for all of this is obviously the customer responsibility matrix. When a government agency is working with a cloud service provider, they can request that, and they often do request that as part of their procurement process. That's a really helpful document. I get requests for that all the time. That's the baseline understanding document. And the goal of that is to list out all of the NIST controls that are in scope for that offering and eliminate some ambiguity. However, as I'll get into with some examples, when I will go into the weeds using Okta examples, even there's still ambiguity in customer responsibility matrices. And when I say that, I'll allude to the ambiguity at a high level. So when you're looking at a customer responsibility matrix, we don't know for a fact. It's written for our cloud service offering and the boundary, but we really want to avoid an agency or a government, state and local organization looking at that and thinking, okay, well, I don't need to do physical access controls for Okta, which means this trumps a different CRM that I have, and therefore I'm going to create a blind spot in a different area where I really need to be doing physical access controls. So customer responsibility matrices are the foundational document. That is absolutely something all the agencies and organizations should be working through with their CSP as part of the initial procurement processes. And then again, there was some ambiguity in that, but what can really help eliminate some of that is STIGs, which are essentially configuration guides. So not all cloud service providers are going to have STIGs. We have one for IDaaS, Identity as a Service offering. That's kind of the how for the customer responsibility matrix. Generally, when you look at a customer responsibility matrix, you're going to see a lot of control language that essentially just talks to, hey, you're required to implement this control using this cloud service. And then when you get into these STIGs or configuration guides, even if it's not a STIG, that's a super helpful resource, which is the how. Taking it from you are responsible for monitoring the usage of your Okta service. The STIG would translate it to check this configuration setting and make sure you are ingesting those logs into your pipeline for monitoring and your SIM tool. So those types of, that combination of CRM to then configuration guide is something you should absolutely be working through with your cloud service provider. So now I'll jump into an example, and I'm going to use Okta for this one. So we are a software as a service provider, and the service we provide is identity management. So in that situation, we're going to manage the full stack up to the application layer. We're managing the operating systems, doing the patching, securing our network, securing our applications, building our applications in a secure manner. But you as the end user still have a lot of responsibilities, even using Okta. Okta, we might not have all of your data, but you're giving us the keys to a lot of your data. So for that reason, when it comes to AC and IA controls, we're going to have a ton of responsibilities, no matter how securely we configure our infrastructure and how securely we build the applications. It's going to be ultimately on the end user of that to ensure that you're using all the great things that we're building. We have flexible authentication policies, accept a lot of different types of authenticators. You can have authentication rules that require traffic to originate from a certain remote access endpoint that you've identified. So if you were to look at our customer responsibility matrix, you're not going to see much of anything inherited at the AC and IA controls, because again, this is a partnership. We want to focus on not hitting agencies and organizations with redundant requirements, but again, the ultimate goal here is not creating security blind spots, which is why we would not mark AC and IA controls inherited. That being said, I understand agencies go under their own audits as well. And a lot of the times I hear about, well, if these controls are not marked inherited, we're going to have to test them with our auditors, because we understand that agencies and government organizations go through their own audits. And the general reply there is, it should be tested, and we're happy to work with you, give you the configuration resources you need to harden your Okta instances, and have the most secure instance of Okta that you can possibly have. But I'll use one more specific example, and then I'll toss it back to Jessica, see if you want to have me go deeper in any different areas, but I'll get technical here for a second. So AC-17 controls for, remote access controls. We're not asking you to manage our VPNs that we use to secure our infrastructure and access, the admin layer of our product. But I'll go back to that authentication policy configuration that you could use in the Okta service, which is that you can certainly configure authentication policies to originate from a certain remote access endpoint. But at the same time, Okta is not going to be configuring your VPN for you and determining the ciphers and encryption that it's using. So if you were to look at our customer responsibility matrix, you might expect to see, AC-17 inherited, because we are software as a service. We're not providing a VPN for all of you. But still, it's just a unique nuance, because we are providing that one authentication policy. We're taking the high bar, and we want to make sure that you are well equipped to secure your Okta orgs. So we have it as a customer responsibility matrix to, essentially use that authentication policy and ensure your sessions are coming from your defined endpoints. And I don't mean to just talk, that's what I know best, Okta. But I don't mean to sit here and just talk about Okta. I know these are challenges that I've talked through with other CSPs, agencies who work with other CSPs. It's an area that is challenging across the board. And, while, like I said at the beginning, while the mission is straightforward, there's a lot of challenges built in here. It's very complex. So I just really encourage everybody to work with your cloud service provider. They're going to be happy to work with you. To make sure everybody has a shared understanding before we move forward with, procurement and contracting. Jessica, back to you.
Thank you, Travis. I could not agree more with everything you've said here, right? And now I'm going to put my lawyer hat on for a second and say, this is where sometimes it gets hard, right? In the conversations between the CSPs and the agencies or government organization is, perhaps we come in with our red pens and the contract terms, and we don't always really understand that there needs to be this shared responsibility and what that should look like. And so really, I just want to encourage everybody here that it's so important to do what Travis said and understand what is your responsibility versus what is your vendor's responsibility. And rather than leaving that till later, find a way to build that into your contract agreements so that there is that clear expectation around those shared responsibilities. This can be done with SLAs. This can be done with accountability clauses. There are ways to do this, but it does require, and I think we hear this all the time, right? True partnership. You are not two adversaries in a courtroom looking to how can I best protect just myself. It has to be, how do I protect myself and my constituents' data, but do so in a way that actually aligns with reality and what the reality is around that shared responsibility. And so this is an opportunity where we can do a lot of hard work in the governments to have nuanced conversations with those who don't live in our world, right? So we talk about this all the time. IT needs to talk to risk needs to talk to IT needs to talk to procurement needs to talk to legal. Everybody has to talk to each other because everybody doesn't know everything about everything. So you're not going to know everything about Okta and the way that Okta does business, but if you're going to enter into a contract with them, it behooves that government organization to sit down, have those conversations, understand that shared responsibility, and then those people that have had those conversations need to get in the room with your fellow cohorts in your agency and say, okay, this is what we've learned. This is what our understanding is. We know that when we're audited, these are going to be the types of things that are going to be our responsibility. And how do we work together with our vendor in the form of drafting this contract to ensure that everybody's needs are met and that we are actually in a partnership? And so, I think sometimes people are like, you make it sound easy. Well, the thing is, it isn't as hard as we make it out, right? It really comes down to good communication and change management, right? Because a lot of us get really rooted in, this is my world and this is where I live. And how do you expand out beyond that? And so really using resources, right? And GovRAMP is a great resource for that. I cannot tell you the amount of times that not only do we have physical resources for you, like our cloud procurement toolkit, but we also can just sometimes act as that third party in a room to help get people together to have these conversations. That doesn't mean we're going to sit in the room and help you negotiate your contract. But if we've had these conversations with your teams and all the relevant stakeholders in advance, everybody's now talking. Everybody kind of understands what we're after, where we're trying to go. And so that's one of the ways that I say, sometimes we overcomplicate things. We don't have to overcomplicate them. And we can be an advocate for you. We can be a resource for you. Just like Travis said, your vendor or potential vendor can be a resource for you. So use your resources, use your tools, and make sure that at the end of the day, whatever agreement you come to really does what it's meant to do, which is creates a partnership that serves both parties and outlines those things really clearly. I could go on and on about this. I think Travis could get into the weeds. He's said, and have a conversation about this the last couple hours, and we'd be happy to do that if you have more questions. But like I said, we've got a really full day today. So I'm just going to ask Travis, is there anything else you want to say before we close out this keynote?
No, I'll just reiterate what you said. Make sure to work with your cloud service provider. They're going to be happy to work with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Travis. I think this was a really important conversation and maybe one that we don't have often enough. So I really appreciate your time and I hope that everybody here learned something today. We are going, oh, thank you. We are going to shift now into our panel discussion, how to vet cloud providers, the smart government playbook. We're really covering the deep stuff here today, aren't we? So I am joined today by two leaders who bring deep expertise in both advising governments and shaping GovRAMP's own approach. First, we have Trace Ridpath, who's a senior consultant at Optiv and a former security specialist with the state of Colorado's Office of IT. Trace has worked hands-on with agencies to strengthen procurement security and evaluation. And then second, we have our very own David Resler, Senior Director with the GovRAMP PMO. David leads assessments and oversight efforts to help providers and governments align on risk management. And together today, they are going to walk us through how governments can evaluate providers more effectively, what to look for when comparing frameworks like SOC 2, FedRAMP, GovRAMP, and how to make smarter procurement decisions. So, with that, I am very excited to welcome David and Trace. And let's kick this off with your experience. Trace, we'll start with you. What does a well-executed CSP vetting process look
like? Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me, GovRAMP friends. That's a great question. I think the most important thing as a person in government, I'm no longer with state government. I've retired and am now serving clients across the spectrum, public and private, on their resiliency needs, their security readiness needs, those types of things. And I think from both perspectives, is an organization, a governmental organization needs to start with alignment. What are their security needs? What are their requirements? And what can the cloud service provider do to stay in alignment with that? You guys talked about building partnerships, and I think one of the great things that GovRAMP provides is it allows you to actually develop that partnership, because partnerships are predicated on trust, right? We both have skin in the game, if you will, the governmental entity and the vendor provider, to ensure that the partnership is as successful as it can be. And I think that's where GovRAMP comes in. The standards adoption, the setting the, kind of creating a level playing field for everyone in the space. That's critically important. And I think that one of the things that a governmental entity wants to look for when they're going out during the procurement process, sending out RFIs and RFPs, looking for submissions for proposal, is how well aligned is the vendor with my requirements. And that's a great place to start. And GovRAMP, I think, really serves as a way to help codify what that means, and help an organization not have to feel like they have to do it all on their own, right? And that's where you talked about coming in and having that three-way discussion, getting the parties involved and walking through that, because everybody does need to be talking and communicating, from procurement teams to technology advisors to decision makers within each of the individual agencies.
Yeah, that's very well said. David, do you have anything you want to add about that?
Yeah, I would say the other thing that you want to do is understand the data that is going to flow through whatever system it is and what the risk that data presents, and right size, if you will, how you want that product assessed. That's a big part of the reason why we created our newest product, GovRAMP Core, for those lower risk or entry level stepping stones into a full-blown assessment. Because we recognize not every vendor has these things in place. We recognize that certain market segments don't have a certified product even. But that doesn't mean government has to stop because there is not a product that has these accreditations behind them. So we created our snapshot, our progressing snapshot, and our core as kind of an on-ramp towards those things as well. So understanding what the risk of the data is and how to position the requirements appropriately is very key.
I love that, David. And I think that's so important, because what we have found, right, is how one organization might use a cloud product might not be the same way that another would.
Right.
And so it really does matter how you classify that data. That is absolutely correct. So back to you, David, how have your expectations around vendor compliance changed over the last several years?
So a lot of people who know me know I have a service provider background. I spent 14 years prior to coming to GovRAMP as a service provider. And one of the things that I was constantly told by legal counsel, sorry, Jessica, was, don't open up and talk about these things because they could be a liability and such. And over the past probably 5 years prior to my coming to GovRAMP and being with GovRAMP, that mentality has really shifted in the marketplace of being more transparent about what you're doing to secure data, being more transparent, as Travis said, about what the responsibility of your clients are in using your product and such. So that I would say transparency is the biggest mindset change I've had over the past 5-6 years. And the industry is kind of following that as well.
I think that's a wonderful change. Trace, anything you want to add to that?
I would agree. I think, especially at state government level, which is what my main perspective is based on. At times, it can feel like a big kind of immovable object. It's difficult to get change to occur quickly, right? Certainly can't occur as quickly as the technology changes. And so what I found one of the largest struggles that we had is over time changing perspectives with folks from legal, with folks from procurement, with agency business line leaders, those types of things, kind of slowly pushing them into that mindset of, hey, transparency is a good thing. We want everybody talking. We want everybody being as open and honest as they can possibly be, because at the end of the day, that's going to help drive that change and innovation and quicker adoption of technologies that help keep public sector data secure and drive business enablement, right? And so, yeah, I would agree with David. I would say that my personal observation is that it's been a huge mindset over the last 5-6 years, a huge mindset change, where people are starting to realize across the entire spectrum, hey, it's a good thing to be transparent. Providers that come and say, you know what, we're not GovRAMP ready. We're not authorized at a FedRAMP level yet. Those types of things. That shouldn't be a deal breaker in any way, shape, or form for a procurement person. That should be the start of the conversation, right? And the things that GovRAMP has done with its tiering models, it's like the core you mentioned, those types of things. I think it levels the playing field not just for government, but for the providers as well, the service providers as well, because it could be from the perspective of a young, lean startup to a very large multinational established technology provider. They're all playing by the same set of rules, and they're all playing at the level in which their customers need them to play at, right? And so that it's that flexibility marked with verifiability, with the ongoing validation, those types of things that engenders that trust in the relationship, in that partnership.
That was really well said. And I love the fact that you're coming from both sides, right? So you've got the public sector viewpoint and that private sector viewpoint, and the fact that you feel that is exactly what is happening with that kind of stair step model, if you will, is what our hope always is. So I think that actually moves us so well into, and David, I'm going to toss this one your way. What are the roles of certifications like GovRAMP and FedRAMP or SOC 2 in helping agencies to assess a provider?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to do is clarify something that a SOC 2 assessor will tell you. SOC 2 is not a certification. It's an attestation. But, part of that is understanding the DNA of each of these different frameworks. SOC 2 started in the financial field for testing systems that drive financial systems. GovRAMP and FedRAMP are both based on the NIST 853, which is a set of security controls designed specifically for government use. That has a wide range of applicability across all forms of government and even some commercial enterprises. So understanding that baseline, I think, is important to understand why some of the nuances exist between them. SOC 2 doesn't include continuous monitoring as you roll forward through that. So it's an assessment that's done every 6 months, 12 months, depending on what the service provider chooses for their product and based on their maturity level, because they might want a more frequent assessment as they're maturing so that the next assessment shows that. FedRAMP and GovRAMP are both based on an annual cycle, and they are pre-selected controls based on that impact level that we talked about, with understanding the risk. SOC 2, you can negotiate some controls out with your assessment firm. FedRAMP, GovRAMP, they're locked in. You're not negotiating those out. So understanding those differences, I think, is very fundamental for that part of the discussion. I talked a little bit about continuous monitoring, and where that comes in. And what that really is on a least monthly basis, your service provider is going to go through and they're going to scan their system, look for vulnerabilities, things that haven't been patched, compliance standards against, Travis mentioned the STIGs earlier, for hardening the environment. And they're going to create a list of what's called POAMs, Plan of Action and Milestones. With GovRAMP, that starts at the core level. So core, ready, and authorized has POAMs as part of the process. It's a quarterly basis for core. It's monthly for authorized and ready statuses. FedRAMP has authorized and ready. They do not do ConMon with ready. They do ConMon with authorized. And only federal agencies have access to that information. So GovRAMP makes that available with the service provider's blessing, available to all participating governments on a case-by-case basis. So making sure that you have access to that data so you understand where the risk exists on a continuous level is very key.
Love
Well,
that. Chris.
and can I jump in and
Please.
add something to that? One of the things that that I love about, well, there's a lot of things that I love about GovRAMP, to be honest with you, but one of the many things that I love about GovRAMP is its interaction and mapping to FedRAMP, right? So several like state agencies, they have to meet federal agency requirements if they want to access that data type. And they also have their own cybersecurity control concerns that they want to make sure are being met to perform, their due diligence. And one of the things that I love about GovRAMP is that it's about scaling trust, not outsourcing judgment, right? and that's really where GovRAMP, I think, shines in working with the service providers and working with the governments that are trying to consume those services, and making sure that each party has what they need to be successful. So as organizations go through and they decide on a security framework that is appropriate for them, maybe it's the NIST cybersecurity framework. The thing that I love about that is its flexibility, right? I can implement the NIST cybersecurity framework without necessarily adopting all of the NIST 853 controls. I might choose to implement the critical controls from CIS. I might choose to implement ISO controls in support of my cybersecurity framework implementation. It all kind of depends on who are the people that I'm serving, who are the people that I'm consuming from, and that flexibility, I think, is what really has been driving, I think, in large part, better adoption of these standards and models. And so I think that's partially why over the last 5 or 6 years we've seen so much movement in the space, which I think is good for everyone.
Yeah, well said. Trace, what's a red flag you've seen in a vendor pitch or documentation that's made you pause?
Well, I think lack of transparency. When it comes to evaluating vendor proposals, in my old putting on my old government job hat, one of the biggest things that is important for government entities is, don't just tell me that you do it. Show me. Show me how you do it. Prove to me that you're actually doing it. And that's one of the great things about moving toward GovRAMP as a partner is that whole show me / due diligence portion. It's providing assurances that my small agency, or maybe it's a big agency, just doesn't have the resources to do, right? I can look at a SOC 2 attestation report. I can say, okay, this is what was occurring at this time, way back and when. So that gives me some form of hope, right? That, excuse me, that they're continuing to do it in the way that they were audited to. But it doesn't really give me any visibility into the day-to-day operations. And that's where if I don't have the ability to send an auditor to a vendor and audit that vendor, or if the vendor's unwilling, right, to let a local government or state government or tribal or territorial or whatever come in and audit their services and processes, you really have to kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best. And so when a vendor says, kind of trust us, we're doing it, that's a red flag. When they're non-transparent, that's a red flag. When they say, well, we're not working with GovRAMP, we don't really think we need to because XYZ, the vast majority of our customers don't require it or what have you. And I think one of the biggest changes or drivers of change has been that tiering model that GovRAMP has adopted and said, will you go with us to GovRAMP and just start that conversation, right? Because there may be, like we said, there may be a vendor out there or a service out there that's being provided that has no authorizations to choose from, right? And so just getting them to go to the table and have a conversation, I think really has been, I think, helpful for the cloud service providers to say, oh, we can actually do this. This isn't going to cost us, $4 million and 6 years to get an authorization. We can right size that authorization level or that readiness level to meet the needs of the client without necessarily having to break the bank for assessments and ongoing assessments and attestations, those types of things. So,
Yeah,
I think the biggest red flag for me would be an unwillingness to even discuss it.
that is a great point. I agree with that. David, any red flags that you've seen?
So I agree 100% with what Troy said regarding transparency. And I want to reflect back on something Travis mentioned about vendors being able and willing to work with you for implementing the product that you're purchasing to make sure that those responsibilities that you pick up as the client of that service provider are being satisfied as well. Make sure that the vendor is being transparent there and willing to work with you, both, so that you are securing your instance of product X. Very important. Otherwise, you're going to have the default settings, which may or may not be the most secure settings.
And the other thing I think is GovRAMP does an exceedingly great job of leveraging its membership, right, for innovation. When I was previously the last position that I held before I retired was Director of Governance, Risk, and Compliance at the state of Colorado. And I had team members as well as myself participating on GovRAMP work groups where we were trying to pick apart a problem and say, okay, what problems are we needing to solve here? And then working with vendor partners in these working groups to craft paths forward, right, for things like one of the things that I'm is near and dear to my heart right now is AI, and state and local, tribal, territorial, they're having to wade through that morass of cloud service tools that have AI integrated in some way, shape, or form into their products. And the organization themselves may not have a game plan yet on how to proceed with AI. They may be They may be just blocking employees from being able to get to ChatGPT, but there's a million other ways for employees to leverage that, and they may not be doing it in ways that are uh, providing good security for the organization. They may be accidentally spilling private sensitive information out to an AI tool without even realizing it. And so the proactiveness with which GovRAMP has taken that on and created a center of excellence for both members of GovRAMP, consumers of GovRAMP services, as well as providers, are walking through and mapping out what are the minimum requirements that we think everyone should be working on. How do we get on the same page there? How do we establish a rules of the road, if you will, that any organization can kind of immediately adopt into a do now, do later, and do long term model of implementation? And so yeah, I mean, that really, I think, is a huge delineator. If you're a member of the community, get involved, right? Go to these working group sessions, raise your hand and volunteer to help vet information that's being provided by vendors, those types of things. I love that, back before GovRAMP, when it was StateRAMP and its initial iterations, it was all member driven, right? and folks like Leah McGrath will remember that whole early time of, hey, we got to figure out a way to do procurement of cloud services much better, because none of us on our own can get the assurances that we need to safely operate in this space. So
I think that is all so absolutely accurate. And I think we could probably talk about all these things for many hours, right? But we're running short on time, and we've got a couple of really good questions left that I want to make sure we hit. So I'm going to just trim these down a little bit, right? So can you provide, Trace, one or two key questions that agencies should include in an RFP or an interview that would help them get to the heart of this matter?
Yeah, the first question I would be is, if you're not already familiar with and working with GovRAMP, are you willing to be? And if a vendor says yes, they make the list of proposals that we're evaluating. I don't think from a procurement perspective, it's violate. If I adopt GovRAMP as my standard for cloud service provisioning in procurement, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying in an RFI or RFP, are you willing to become familiarized with and work with GovRAMP as part of this journey with us? And if the answer is yes, they're going to say that, and they're going to welcome it, and they're going to work with you head on to try to ensure that they're meeting your requirements, and that they're well aligned with what your data security requirements are, with what your overall security practice requirements are.
David, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I totally agree with what Trace was saying, is that willingness to work with, kind of relates back to the transparency topic as well, of, a vendor who's going to work with you to meet or exceed your requirements is the vendor that you want to have as a long-term partner. That they will go that extra distance for you, and they want to make sure that they are secure. It's not just that they are required to be secure, but they want to be secure themselves.
I love that.
Very much so. And I think GovRAMP is how how public sector organizations kind of turn risk into readiness, right? Mm-hmm. And then over time move readiness into resilience. And resilience is so important in this day and age with not just from a malicious attacker perspective, but just from everyday life happens, and an organization has to be resilient, and an organization has to be prepared for disruptions of any shape or form. And I think GovRAMP really provides the roadmap for that.
Yeah, well said. David, this is always one of my favorite questions. Are there any creative or non-obvious signals of a trustworthy vendor that people should look for?
The first thing that I look at is how much information can I find on the vendor's website that they are publicly posting. Do they have a link to their security documentation, their security certifications or attestations, and then can I independently verify those? Just because I have the GovRAMP logo on my website, do I go to the GovRAMP website and find that product listed? It may be that the website's a general website and they have 5 or 6 products and use the logo, but only 1 or 2 of them are in the authorized core or already program. So being able to cross-reference those things is one of the first things I look at.
So it sounds like we're going right back to what we started with, which is transparency.
It is.
Yeah, I love that. Trace, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add that it's been anecdotally my personal observation in working with cloud service providers that without fail, every one of them that I've had the opportunity to stay in contact with and maintain ongoing partnerships with have all universally said, "Whew, that wasn't nearly as hard as we thought." And or that wasn't nearly as expensive as we were afraid it was going to be. And those are, I think, great selling points for vendors, is to say, we were very reticent about walking down this additional perceived line of red tape with getting involved with GovRAMP. But after having gone through that process or continuing our journey within that process, we've realized, hey, this was not nearly as onerous and burdensome as we initially have feared. It really is a driver of improvement as opposed to an impediment, right? And I think at the end of the day, service providers just want happy customers, and they want happy customers to talk about their experiences so that they can get more happy customers. And happy customers, the way you get there is through building that trust and transparency in your partnerships. So
yes,
and
love that.
Yeah, there's not an organization better than GovRAMP to help achieve that. So
Trace, I think you really like us, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah, I've been a champion of you guys since it first started.
You have, yes,
yeah.
yes, and I love that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I wish way back in the early 2000s when I started in cybersecurity, we had a GovRAMP to rely on and lean on, because we certainly, it was needed way back then, and it continues to be an essential, absolutely essential tool for governments of all sizes to lean on.
So we are at time, but I do have one question that I think is so important for the group that's on the call that I do want to end with. So sum it up, top of mind, right? If a procurement team could walk away from this call today with just one improvement to their vetting process, Trace, what would you recommend?
Don't be afraid of change. Embrace new ideas. Don't look at GovRAMP as an impediment to innovation or advancements. Look at it as a partner in enabling that, as that enablement is so key. As I said before, you're not outsourcing judgment. You're enabling trust, and that's where I think overwhelmed procurement people and folks that are writing proposals to obtain services really need to be aware of that and say, oh, thank goodness I've got somebody that will hold my hand and walk me through this. And I can see at the end of the day, happy consumers of the services that I've helped them procure. So.
Love that. David, you have anything you wanna add?
Yeah, so I would say verify before you buy. Make sure that the security really is in place, that the vendor is being transparent, hit that word again, in their security posture and where they are on their journey. Because it is a journey that continues on even once you are fully authorized. The landscape changes, and so should your vendor, and so should you and your expectations.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely love that. All right, guys, this was so informative. And now we are to the tricky part. We are opening it up to questions from the audience. We already have a couple in the Q&A, but anybody else that's got questions, please go ahead and drop those in now, and we will start down the list. First question, great one. Any other tips for handling vendors who say, Trace, I'm going to give this one to you first. We don't think we need GovRAMP because most SLTT orgs don't require it.
I believe, and this is just Trace's personal opinion, over time, market drivers, security requirements, the changing threat landscape that is ever evolving is going to dictate that it will be required at some point. I think it's always easier and better to be ahead of the game than it is to be trying to play catch up. And I think any vendor that says, well, we don't have the time or the clamoring of our customers that we're serving to do this, I think they're doing themselves a disservice by not taking a look at it and not really being proactively planning to go ahead and jump on the train, because I think at some point they're not going to have a choice. I really do see where, globally, cybersecurity legislation and mandates are becoming tighter, more requirements, those types of things. If you need to play in a shared data environment, every player needs to meet a minimum set of requirements, or you're not going to be able to allowed to join the club, right? And so I think just having those conversations with the vendors and saying, maybe you don't see it as important right now. However, if you're not even willing to have the discussion and explore it with me, I don't know that I'm willing to take the risk of bringing you into my trusted vendor provider pool, right? And to a lesser and lesser degree, thank goodness, over the last 5-6 years, my personal observation was that vendors were becoming more open to the idea. We have some, and I won't name them, but there's some big service providers out there that provide to a lot of states, and they're kind of the only player in the space, if you will, to provide a certain service, right? And I think they used to use that as leverage to say, no, we're not going to do that. But I think even they are starting to open up and realize, hey, it's not just Colorado asking anymore, or it's not just California, or it's not just Rhode Island. It's the library district of Columbus, Ohio. It's the water district in Savannah, Georgia. It's all of these different organizations at multiple different sizes are all kind of starting to say, hey, we can't do vendor due diligence on our own adequately for every single service that we consume. And we're all rushing to the cloud because we need to leverage the cost savings. We need to leverage the time to going from ideation of a project to implementation, and the speed with which that can occur leveraging cloud services. And so I think just going back to the, hey, will you have the conversation with us is critically important. Even if they say, well, most of our customers aren't asking for it. Say, well, we are. And if you want us to be your partner, we'd really appreciate it if you'd have a conversation with us and with GovRAMP, and let's just start the conversation. Doesn't mean that we expect you to be core ready or GovRAMP ready or authorized next week, but we want to start down that journey with you. And I'm willing to bet if I'm asking as a governmental organization, I'm not the first person that's asking that vendor that question. I
Right.
guarantee you, I guarantee you there's been a groundswell of folks that are asking
Yeah.
that question and will continue to ask it. So
Very true. David, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say it's a market differentiator when you have a GovRAMP verified status, be that core, ready, or authorized. If you have that and your competition doesn't, that makes you stand out above and beyond where they're at. And the other value proposition the GovRAMP verified status has is it's a validate once, use many proposition. So to Trace's example of I'm selling to the state of Colorado, and now I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and now I'm over here talking to another government entity. It streamlines that whole process for you and for the governments, where they can say, oh, you have that GovRAMP verified status. I don't have to go through this big questionnaire. I don't have to go through these additional steps because it's already done.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I would also just add to that, because I have the pleasure of working with a lot of our government orgs. A great question to follow up with is, well, then tell me what it is you're doing that shows me as an outside potential customer that you really care about cybersecurity, because I have a unique and very important duty to protect my constituents' data. And I need to know that you take that as seriously as I do. And I think that goes back to where, both David and Trace said, show me you're willing to walk the walk with me. It is not you need to get authorized today, and maybe you don't ever need to be authorized, but you certainly need to be on the journey, and it needs to matter as much to you as it does to me, because when and if something goes wrong, I need to know that we are a team that are doing everything we can together to be successful in this endeavor. So that's my 2 cents as somebody who works with the governments and isn't afraid to tell you what I tell them. There is one more question, but we are right at time. So Monty, I will get your question over to David and Trace, and we will put together a response for you, and we will send that out. I do want to thank Brian for your comment. I know you mentioned, what do you see for GovRAMP adoption expansion in the coming years? And I really do want to say, I think what Trace said is correct. We have continued to see increase awareness, adoption, desire to incorporate GovRAMP into requirements in a variety of ways, and we just expect that to continue. So that's kind of the best short answer that I can give you. And Brian, I could talk all day about that. So if you ever want to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to do that for you. I want to thank both David and Trace for their time today. I think there have been so many wonderful insights, and I'm really glad that we could share this with all of you. And as you can see here, this concludes our, if you would say, planned programming, but we're going to move into optional office hours, which is an informal Q&A session with GovRAMP leadership and the PMO. For those of you that have not already registered for tomorrow's day 3 of our learning series, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. Obviously, QR codes, I know, whatever, we're not going to talk about that. But you can do that on our website as well. And then also, if you are a private sector member, please don't forget that we are having our exclusive private sector member meeting at our Cyber Summit, which I really hope everyone on this call is going to be in attendance at. So that is going to be October 2nd and 3rd in Chicago, presented in part with Carasoft, and we would just love to see all of you there. And so with that, I will say I am so pleased to be joined today by our esteemed Executive Director, Leah McGrath, Naomi Ward, one of our government engagement directors here at GovRAMP, and then David Resler, our Senior Director with the PMO. So at this point, you may please feel free to drop any questions that you all have into the Q&A. The chat is closed, so don't try to drop them there. But please feel free to put them into the Q&A. If you have any issues, let us know. But we are excited to answer whatever questions you all might have.
Yeah, and Jessica, I went ahead and answered Monty's question in the Q&A, but if we want to start there.
Yes, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, I would say start with our authorized product list. And scroll further down. If you don't find someone on the authorized product list, look at the progressing product list, because those are organizations that are starting their journey towards a GovRAMP verified status. So that listing is a great resource to say, these are vendors that have a commitment out there towards cybersecurity. So that was the first place I would recommend.
That is a very good suggestion. I think the other thing too goes back to what both you and Trey said earlier, which is just asking the question. If you're not going through a traditional procurement process, it's asking the question, what are you doing? And what's your willingness to work with GovRAMP? And I also think having a very clearly defined policy in your own organization of what your standard is. So for example, are you a NIST 853 shop? Is that your standard? If that's your standard, that makes the conversation a lot easier, regardless of the procurement method.
Yep. And if it's not exclusively 853, but a blend, that's okay too. I've worked for a couple of organizations that had to adhere to not just American standards, but also Euro standards. So we took the approach of looking at all those frameworks, blending them together, and going to the high water mark. So, if a EU standard was a higher bar than the NIST standard, incorporate that in, because that's the reason why they're called baselines. They are the minimum, entry point. It's perfectly fine, acceptable, and encouraged to go above and beyond on those.
Yeah, well said. All right. Any other questions from our audience? We've got a lot of you on here, and I'm certain you have questions. And there is no question too big or too small for us to tackle, guys. So don't be afraid.
But while we're waiting on questions, one thing I'll add to what was said earlier, Jessica, you talked about having that conversation, and Trace mentioned as well. A follow-up to that is, once you've agreed to that, make sure that it's codified in the contract, that those organizations will obtain that verified status, and set some benchmarks for when certain milestones will be achieved. Is a great purchasing process to incorporate into your procurement.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think, how how your organization will, adopt or work forward towards incorporating these into your processes, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on your size. It's going to depend on, your own maturity journey, where you are. And so there's so many elements of that. So we have another question, and that is, do vendors have a view through GovRAMP to see both 853 and CGIS, since that's required so widely in our community? David, did you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so one of the things we developed, started working on it last year and made the first publication early this year, is our CGIS overlay. For those of you who aren't familiar with CGIS, it's an FBI standard for the Criminal Justice Information Services. What it does is it takes the NIST 853 control set, but looks at it from the criminal justice viewpoint. The CGIS office, in conjunction with their user community, helped develop the standards for what the parameters in the 853 would be. So what GovRAMP did is we looked at the GovRAMP framework, we looked at the CGIS requirements, and we blended them together in one SSP document, or OCM, Operational Controls Matrix. That way, exactly to the point of the person's question of, can you get a single point of view on this? And the answer is yes, if they use the CGIS overlay.
Love that. Leah, anything you want to add?
No, I was shaking my head yes with David. That has been a labor of love to have that overlay adopted. I think one thing that, if Chris Weatherly were here, he's the director of the CGIS office, he would have me say, he'd be like hitting me under the table to say, there's no such thing as a CGIS certification. So for those who do receive this authorization with the CGIS aligned overlay, what that indicates is, hey, they're most likely conforming. I think it's going to give you the transparency that you need as a government official to make that decision. And really, that's what we're about, right? Is raising transparency and visibility so that our participating governments can make have the information, be able to make those risk-based decisions that are right for them, and then know that we are updating that overlay. So we are going to be restarting our CGIS aligned task force here. So if anyone is still interested in getting involved, we welcome your input. I loved listening. Trace, thank you for your comments as he was talking about how we've really iterated the program, and that's been guided by member input. And so we will continue to be looking at the overlay for CGIS to understand what works, what doesn't, how we can make this more usable, how we can simplify it, a very complex thing, as best we can to make it more usable. But the other thing that I was thinking, Jessica, is how important that regulatory harmonization is, that framework harmonization. And so, if you've been a part of this community for long, you've heard that as a kind of a plea to the federal government, please regulate or harmonize all these different cyber regulations that flow down and have a really big impact on industry who is trying to conform and comply to all sorts of different frameworks and requirements, and also to states who often become kind of that funnel, the catch-all for all of the above. And so what we try to do is operationalize framework harmonization where we can. So we are looking at thinking about what's the next kind of framework, whether it's, David, I know we've talked about healthcare, or we've, looked at privacy, or there are other overlays that would be helpful. We want to hear from you as well. So that's something that we'll be taking on likely in 2026, is another overlay, in addition to our AI security task force work that's looking at how to tackle security when AI is involved, and how to help just continue to bring people together in a way that facilitates trustworthiness.
I love that, Leah. Thank you. And I think that's very well said, and really important for everybody to know that really is the heart of our mission, is to make this easier and make this better for everybody that's involved, right? Not one group over another, but for everyone. We did get a question from Kate, and I was trying to get some clarification. is there a process for leveraging snapshots submitted for other providers' authorization packages? And so I'm going to go with what my assumption is. And that assumption is that a cloud service provider has an integrated tool that works with another product, that product is going through the authorization process, and that integrated tool is required to get a snapshot in order to assist the initial provider's package with going through authorization. Talk about a little bit of confusing, right? And so the answer is, Kate, if that is what you're talking about, and David, please correct me if I'm wrong, if the product that has gotten the snapshot is a member of StateRAMP, they may use that snapshot for a year just like they could in any other form or fashion. If they are not a member, then this snapshot is specific and only usable to the package for which it was processed, and it is not eligible to be used outside of that package. David, did I get that right?
You did. You got that absolutely right. And the process to get that insight starts with your government engagement director to complete what's called a government access request for that information. And what happens is behind the scenes, the PMO will send that to the service provider and ask permission to share that information with you. And it's up to that service provider who received the snapshot to say yes or no on providing that further.
And on the other side of the coin, if you are a provider and you're saying, can I use my snapshot to go out to a procurement request and submit that, the answer would be yes. If you are a GovRAMP member, you can do that. If not, when we receive a request to verify from a government, we would indicate that you do not have a valid snapshot and that you are not a member of GovRAMP, that snapshot is only valid for purposes of another package. So I hope that answers your question, because I realize that's very nuanced. And if you have further questions, I would encourage that you can email myself and David. Our emails are our first name at govramp.org, as you can see here, very easy. So even if you don't have this slide in front of you, I hope you'll be able to remember that. And you can just email us and we can set up time to talk more. We do have another question in the chat of what's on your roadmap for upcoming changes, resources, etc. to GovRAMP. And I'm going to pass that one off to Leah because she is our visionary for all things GovRAMP.
Well, you must have been reading my mind, because during the discussion, I was taking some notes. We are actually going to be talking more about a roadmap at our upcoming summit. So we certainly hope that you can join us in Chicago, October 2nd and 3rd, and especially for our private sector members who may be on the call, October 1st, when we will have our in-person private sector member meeting. We're going to walk through this and we want your input. But a few things on the roadmap. And I actually have my notes in front of me, so I can talk to that. Some of the things that we'll be talking about would be significant change request, some of the clarification there, and also piloting an automated form that the PMO has been developing. And so I'm just going to leave it at that as a teaser, David, because I'm really excited for this and something that we can roll out and really help provide clarification where there has been ambiguity in the past, I think, across the ecosystem here. And so that's something we're excited about. One of the things that we'll also be talking to our standards and technical committee about later this year is the need to really adopt a high impact level baseline. In the past, we've really relied on the FedRAMP Rev 5 high level or impact level baseline. And so making sure that we have one defined for GovRAMP is important. And updating that CGIS aligned overlay, as we said. And so that'll be something we're really looking forward to re-engaging, and updating the CGIS aligned overlay to correlate and support the CGIS security policy 6.0, right, David?
Yes.
Publication. And so one of the things that we will be doing, and so, ask all of you to put your thinking caps on for us, is every year we come out, we come to our members and ask for your input on our policies, on our security program, and to understand what works, what doesn't, what's missing, what do we need to be thinking about in the future. And so we will be doing that again, likely for the majority of the month of October, part of November, to kind of come to you and say, what else? And so that is an opportunity to hear from our members directly on the public sector and private sector side as to kind of what the needs are. And I can tell you, we take your feedback very earnestly. And so, as you can tell, as we've iterated the program, and so that'll be something on our roadmap as well. But those are some of the kind of big ticket items this year. We'll be discussing more and continuing with our AI security task force well into, I think, the new year, David, into 2026. So something we're really excited about.
Love that. We're very busy. We're always very busy. There's never a doubt there.
I think the last thing, Jessica, is
yeah.
I do think maybe not on our policy roadmap, but generally we are seeing more of our participating governments really lean in to adopt GovRAMP more wholly into their procurements, into their T's and C's. And I think that's so very exciting. We know that when GovRAMP is incorporated more holistically, we can serve better, right? Because it's just providing that consistent, transparent view that allows our participating governments to better manage their risk as it relates to cloud security. And so I think that's something that's really exciting that we are thrilled. And I think it's because of all of the iterations and evolutions that have transpired that you talked about earlier today, from the procurement toolkit, really giving that kind of hands-on, A, B, C's of to how to do it, or the choose your own adventure, as we like to say. But also so that you're requiring what's appropriate for the risk. And I think that's also with the core. So we're going to see more, I think, leaning into that core status, into the step-by-step approach that I think our program has really kind of grown into. And I'm so excited to see that happen.
Yes, I think that is all very well said and very true and exciting, really,
Yes.
to just see all that is going on and all the changes and growth in this space. So I am, with that, going to close out for the day. We don't have any other questions in the inbox here. I do want to just thank everybody for your time today. For joining us, for your very wonderful questions. I want to thank our panelists for speaking. I want to thank Travis for the keynote. You will receive a follow-up email following this event with today's recording and key links and an ebook compiling all of this week's sessions. So you won't get that today, but it will be forthcoming. I want to make sure everybody knows that. And as I said before, thank you so much for joining us today. We really hope we're going to see you tomorrow for day 3. And even more than that, we really hope we're going to see you in October at the summit. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.